What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and early projected record series. The Texas Longhorns are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Texas did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for the Texas Longhorns. My projection for this team was 11-1, and then my prediction for them was also 11-1, and I was right on the money with both of their projection and predictions from last year. This team going 11-1 in the regular season, of course, the one loss coming in the regular season was to Georgia, of course, and then they obviously lost to Georgia again in the SEC championship. But they did go to the college football playoff. They were in the semifinals against Ohio State. If they would have won that game, they would have been in the national championship. But this team had their ups and downs at times. You know, Texas kind of looked good at times and then sometimes bad at times. But they went 13-3 overall last year. So a good season for Texas, but still coming up just short of getting into a national championship game appearance. Here is the schedule from last season for Texas. And again, they went 11-1 with this schedule. The schedule wasn't all that tough from last year. Yeah, you had to play Georgia and also Michigan in the non-conference, but looking at their non-conference schedule, like I mentioned, Colorado State on the road at Michigan, UTSA, and ULM Monroe. So 3 cupcake games in the non-conference, and then Michigan, of course, on the road. I did pick Texas to win that game. If you go back to my prediction last year, I did pick Texas to win this game, and that's exactly what they did. But it wasn't really a close game. Michigan wasn't really good in the first half of the year, but second half, that's a team that finished really strong. So if they probably would have played in the later season, maybe Michigan probably would have beat them. But you look at their first year in the SEC, you look at their home schedule, they played Mississippi State, Georgia, Florida, and Kentucky all at home. They, of course, play Oklahoma on a neutral field, so that's kind of like, you know, a road game, but still, it's in Dallas, so it's pretty much more Texas fans down there than Oklahoma fans. But looking at their road schedule last year, they played Vanderbilt, they also played Arkansas and Texas A&M, so not a tough, road schedule last year for Texas. Arkansas and Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt ended up being a close game, but Arkansas, of course, that was kind of not even a close game. Texas A&M, obviously the rivalry, Texas kind of dominated the game. And again, the one loss coming to Georgia last year was the only loss Texas had in 2024 on this schedule. Let's now look ahead to 2025. This is the schedule for Texas, and before we go game by game, let's take a look at who they will play in the non-conference this year. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will play 4 non-conference games like the SEC teams do. Ohio State on the road, San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston. So they get 3 out of their 4 non-conference games at home. San Jose State's not a bad team out of the Mountain West, but Texas definitely should be a big favorite. And then UTEP and Sam Houston, same story from there. So 3 cupcake games, and then you got the big game against Ohio State on the road. I mentioned this game being one of the biggest games in week 1 of college football, and also definitely the biggest game that I think we've had in college football for a very long time. And this is a rematch, of course, from the playoff semifinal in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl Classic. So again, looking forward to that game. 2 different quarterbacks here going at it for these 2 teams. Let's now take a look at the home schedule here for the Texas Longhorns. They're going to be playing 3 home games in the SEC. They'll play Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and Texas A&M. So they get all 3 of these games at home this year. Just like last year, all these games are on the road, but they'll play them at home. They get Texas A&M at home. I think that's really good news there. Again, that's a rivalry game, of course, that got renewed from last year since Texas came to the SEC in 2024. Let's now go to the away schedule. They're going to be playing 4 road games in the SEC, but they'll play a 1 neutral site game, and that, of course, is Oklahoma and Dallas. That's a game that's played in Dallas every year. But they'll play road games against Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Georgia. I feel like Florida and Georgia are really your 2 toughest road games. You got to go to the Swamp to play that game at Florida. And Florida obviously finished the season pretty hot down, the stretch last year. Kentucky obviously wasn't really good last year. That could be some sort of a trap game. Mississippi State wasn't very good last year, but you got to deal with the Cowbells. And obviously Georgia, that's a tough place to play in Athens. So Pretty tough road schedule for Texas, but it's a schedule that's kind of similar to last year. It's not all too tough. Let's now go back to the schedule here and go game by game now for Texas. And again, they kick things off with a big game on the road at Ohio State on August 30th. Again, I've been mentioning this game now for quite some time. It's one of the biggest games coming up in the regular season, in my opinion. Then they play their other 3 non-conference games: San Jose State on September 6th, UTEP on September 13th, and then Sam Houston on September 27th. And very surprisingly, they get a bye week before playing Sam Houston, which I don't think that's a really good spot for a bye week. You'd rather have it right before the Florida game on the road, which is next after that on October the 4th. Then you play Oklahoma, of course, on a neutral site field in Dallas. Last year's game, of course, was not even close between these two teams. You play them on October the 11th. Then it's on the road at Kentucky on October 18th. Then back on the road again against Mississippi State on October 25th. So back-to-back road games there against Kentucky and Mississippi State. These were two teams that were not really good last year, but that's kind of a tough back-to-back in my opinion. Vanderbilt, they'll play them at home on November 1st. Then they get their second bye week before playing Georgia on the road. Another big game here, but the good news is they get a bye week here, so I like how the bye week sets up here, but not the first bye week. The first bye week does not really set up well for Texas because they have to play Sam Houston, coming out of the bye week instead of Florida. But after that Georgia game, it's Arkansas at home on November 22nd, and then they close things out with the rivalry game against Texas A&M on November 29th. And like I said, last year's game between these two teams, it was not even a close game whatsoever. It was only a 10-point win for Texas, but if you watch the whole game from last year, Texas was just clearly the better team. So that's the schedule for 2025. Let's now get into the projection here for Texas. This is the scale I have been using so far for these projections. And like I said, those red games at 1%, those are counted as automatic losses, not guaranteed losses, but you're not going to be seeing any games on here in the red, orange, or yellow because Texas, we know that they'll be favored in almost every single one of their games. But 20% games in the orange are going to be games where Texas will be a double-digit underdog, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. 40% games in the yellow are going to be games where Texas will be a clear underdog in by about 6 or 7 points, also known as a touchdown. 50-50 games, of course, will stay in the white. Those are games that can go really either way. 60% games in the purple are going to be games where Texas will be favored by about a touchdown, like I mentioned with the yellow games at 40%, 6 or 7 points, somewhere in that range, and then 80% games in the blue. Those are games where Texas will be favored by double digits as well, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. And then your green games are your automatic wins, not guaranteed wins, but counted as automatic wins here when we do these projections. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We'll start with the easy wins here for Texas. I think you got 3 of them on here: San Jose State, UTEP, and Sam Houston. 3 of these games should be pretty easy games for Texas. I don't really think they struggle in any of them. It would be a big shock if they would lose like maybe one of these games, but San Jose State might be a little bit tough because they're a Mountain West team and they were okay team from last year, but I think Texas definitely should overall take care of business in all 3 of these games. So that's your green games. That's your automatic wins here for Texas. Let's now go to the blue games where I think Texas will be favored by double digits, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. I got 4 of them on here: Kentucky on the road, Mississippi State on the road, and then Vanderbilt and Arkansas both at home. Kentucky and Mississippi State in back-to-back road games, I get it. Both of them are on the road. They should be in the purple, but Texas clearly is the better team, and they should be favored by 10 to 14 points in both of those road games. And, Kentucky and Mississippi State were not really good last year, let's be honest. I don't know how good they're going to be this year. Vanderbilt and Arkansas, last year Vanderbilt gave Texas a scare. That's the reason why it's in the blue there. And then Arkansas, Arkansas is a little bit of a question mark for me, but those are 2 teams that were pretty average last year, so that's the reason why they both end up in the blue instead of like the green. So I think all 4 of these games, though, Texas will be favored by double digits, again by 10 to 14 points, also known as a couple of touchdowns and somewhere in that range. So I think Texas will be favored in all 4 of those games by double digits. They're also counted as wins, not automatic wins like the green games, but not guaranteed wins either, but they're just counted as slight wins. So let's now go to the purple games where I think Texas will be favored by about a touchdown. I got a couple of them on here, Florida and Oklahoma. I think, both of these games, Texas will be favored by 6 or 7 points. Florida on the road, that's a very tough place to play, but I think Texas still overall is the better team. I get it, that's a very tough place to play, but that's a really losable game. Let's be honest, that's a trap game there right after a, game against Sam Houston, and then obviously Oklahoma's a neutral site. I get it, it's a rivalry, it's always very entertaining, but last year's game, just based off of that, it wasn't really close at all. So both of those games, I think Texas will be favored by 6 or 7 points, somewhere in that range, by about a touchdown. And then that leaves you with 3 50-50 games. Ohio State on the road, Georgia on the road, and then Texas A&M at home. So I think all these are your 50-50 games for Texas. Ohio State, obviously, a big non-conference game. Because of that, it's a really even matchup. Georgia obviously beat Texas twice last year. I think you can favor Georgia in this game by maybe 4 or maybe lesser points, in that range somehow. But I think it's a pretty even matchup, two very talented teams. And then obviously Texas A&M, that's a rivalry game. Anything can happen. I think Texas probably could be favored by 3 points or less in that game because they're playing at home this year. And I think I was really close to putting in the purple, to be honest, but Texas A&M obviously looks like it's heading in the right direction with Mike Elko. So those are your three 50-50 games. Those games can really go either way. So let's now get a very early projected record here for Texas based on how tough this schedule is. So we count the green games as automatic wins, the blue games also as wins, and then we average out those purple games at 60%. And then you split those 50-50 games. Let's say they win 2 out of these 3 50-50 games, or maybe at least one of them, and then you kind of, have to, slip up against one of those, teams in the purple. Or let's say they get a win in the purple, and that's how you split it. Let's say they lose those road games to Ohio State and Georgia. And then let's say they, beat Texas A&M and one of these teams in the purple. That's going to give you a projected record of 10-2 here for Texas. So, again, if you split the 50-50 games, again, like I mentioned, if they lose to Ohio State and Georgia, then you can at least win 2 more games. One game right there, maybe it's Texas A&M in that 50-50 category. And then you can win one of these purple games and lose one of them. And that's going to give you a projection of 10-2. So that's how you get a projected record for Texas at 10-2. You win those 2 out of those 3, or 1 out of those 3 2 50-50 games, and then you got your 2 purple games here that you can possibly win, but also slip up. I mean, Texas probably can go 9-3. I mean, they can also go 11-1 again. I think that would probably have to be the worst case scenario is 9-3, and then best case would have to be 11-1. But 10-2 is how the projection came out to be for Texas for 2025. Again, if you split those 50-50 games, let's say you win one of them, you probably beat Texas A&M, but you win one of those purple games, and that's going to give you a projection of 10-2. So that is my projection here for the Texas Longhorns for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree? And give me your thoughts about Texas's schedule down in the comments below. Is it tough or not so tough? Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.